Beef, like other meats, varies some in quality. Inspection and identification ensures that each carcass is placed in the proper grade. By this means, when the purchaser buys choice beef, he gets choice beef. And if a lesser quality is satisfactory, it is so identified.
Will he remember this when he wakes up in the morning? Or just know from the scales of blood crusted around his mouth that he feasted like a king? He hovers over the body laid out on the floor in an expanding pool of inky red, the splayed limbs, the naked chest, pocked with meaty divots, the charcoal gaze slanting out of the broken head. If you didn't know better, you might think the man was contemplating the popcorn ceiling, wondering what it would cost to hire someone to bring it up to date. The eater lowers himself to the carcass and inhales. The lingering body odor strengthens his hunger. His lips part, bearing slick, ready teeth. The muscled shoulder, Jim-honed as if for this purpose, puts up a fight against his bite and comes away with a ragged, snapping tear. He chucks it back, champing like a dog with a chicken wing, mashes the sinew between his molars. There's not much flavor, bland and easy, slightly sweet. The coppery tang of its juices overwhelms. They dribble down his chin, tickling, staining his shirt. Dragging a hand across his mouth, he leaves a glistening red smear. He gets up to grab a napkin from the kitchen. Paper towel, something. Despite what they say, he's no animal. At least no more than anyone else. Everybody has to eat. Some bodies are just a little bit hungrier. So that is an excerpt from Luke Dumas's horror novel, Nothing Tastes as Good. The title of this book is an homage to the controversial phrase by Kate Moss, famous supermodel, "Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels."
Kate has that quality of child woman, which touches a nerve with men especially.
It is basically saying two things at once. It hints at this idea that if you're not able to make this very simple choice, you not only don't deserve to feel attractive, but you have no willpower, no determination at all. And as a society, that is basically the way that we treat bodies in general, with oversimplification, misunderstanding, and prejudice. Now, this horror cannibalism story is essentially a response to this idea, and today I want to talk about it, and I also want to talk about some of my other favorite body image horror media and what I think that the themes are trying to say. So, of course, spoiler warning, if you want to have no spoilers, then don't watch this video. You can still enjoy this analysis not having read the book because I'm going to give you the plot. I have a personal stake in this idea of body image because duh, I'm a woman, so yeah. But I also have struggled with binge eating disorder, and I've talked about that a lot in my less analysis type of videos. But that is easier now to talk about because it is just becoming socially acceptable to discuss that type of eating disorder. It wasn't before. When I was going through it, nobody would ever admit that. So I'm liking this trend on TikTok where people are talking about what it's like, and it's becoming less of a taboo topic, which is the first step to getting some kind of understanding and empathy from people. So I'm not an expert in any of these topics. I'm not even an expert at media analysis, literally, obviously, but I want to discuss what I think these themes mean and then what I'm seeing culturally happen with bodies and body image. This book is about class and food addiction and body image, obviously, and it is bleak and violent and very pessimistic because it has this tone of this is not going to get better. And it ends on a very bleak note and a very nihilistic note. Because when it comes to body image, our society literally takes one step forward and 20 steps back. And it doesn't seem like this is something that's going to get better. It really seems like we're no farther than we were 20 years ago. And that is actually on purpose, because body image is the most powerful form of social control that people actually do to themselves. Cultural theorist Susan Bordeaux said, "The body is not only a text of culture, It is also, as anthropologist Pierre Bourdieu and philosopher Michael Foucault, among others, said, a practical, direct locus of social control. The ideal healthy and attractive weight is culturally enforced, and especially for women, bodies are often trends. If somebody is highly aware at all times of what they look like and how they're being perceived in the one body they have to move through the world, they are as good as controlled. They're as good as predictable. You're constantly distracted by it in such a massive way. It's one of the most powerful ways to take away someone's autonomy without them really noticing it. So I want to talk about the connection between that and Ozempic, but also control, cannibalism, and taboos. So this novel is wildly entertaining, and that is not lost on me. It's essentially a splatterpunk novel because of how pop culture it is. It's not like a super deep, really hard to understand novel. It's basically like a violent graphic depiction of events. But it being so modern and pop culture focused to me, I think is very much on purpose. And I think it's very self-aware of the themes it's discussing. It's not creating a somber and depressing portrait of food addiction like The Whale, for example. It is instead a more bright and bloody satire of our culture in a way that is really, really quite easy to understand and digest. So in this book, there is a revolutionary drug called obesity, and it's distributed by taking injections of a substance called emaciate. And that is a very overt satire of Ozempic. So because you're in the main character's head, it forces you to empathize with someone who is overweight and is working at Target. That is basically what it's forcing you to do in a very, very direct way. And I think that's partially because when we start to look at bodies on a macro scale and trends on a macro scale, we get extremely mean and very rude. We seem to lose all empathy. And you see this in comment sections, and you see it in like the malice and judgment towards people that don't fit into society's beauty standards. It's actually crazy. It's almost a form of entertainment. So before you're introduced to Emmett, the main character, the novel opens with a quote by Charles Dickens. And because Charles Dickens grew up very hungry and poor, this quote is doing a lot of heavy lifting in introducing you to the themes of like food addiction and food noise. Charles Dickens' experiences with food shaped his writing heavily. It's like a big thing. Charles Dickens and food descriptions. In a really famous study called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, a group of 36 men were basically starved, and they were given wartime rations and a very low amount of calories a day to lose 25% of their body weight. And then they studied how they acted during and after they lost this weight. And what this study proved is that their bodies and minds remembered hunger for a very, very long time, long after their calories were brought back to normal. And after the experiment, food became an obsession for a lot of these men. They became obsessed with cooking and cookbooks and food intake and obsessing over meal portions. The men also experienced profound lethargy, apathy, irritability, and even severe depression. And several suffered from emotional breakdowns. And lastly, the participants largely withdrew from social activities and going out in public and withdrawing from women. So they withdrew romantically and socially. So from a scientific standpoint, it makes a lot of sense that Charles Dickens became obsessed with food in his writing because as a child, he was basically starved and they didn't have enough money to feed him. He has a lot of memories of going hungry, so his characters in his writing have these really detailed, descriptive ways of talking about food. I think oftentimes food and an obsession about food is so powerful that sometimes people actually flip and become like diet obsessed after they deal with food addiction. And I think this is like a very interesting thing when it comes to extreme diets and very actively anti-health at every size content online. It is so extreme and so food obsessed. I would say that these people are just as obsessed with food as the people that they are trying to critique. I think this push and pull theme of obsession and reaction is really central to the novel because you notice Emmett literally doing a binge restrict cycle, but he's also constantly fighting this obsession that he has with food. He works at Target where he is yet to be treated with respect by his coworkers or the people that come in as guests. And the novel bombards you with humiliation at every angle from Emmett's perspective. And mostly because of his shame about his weight, he is very stagnant in life. He has an unused master's degree in education because he quit education because of harassment because of his weight from students. He also has had no boyfriend since college, and he lives in constant fear and anxiety of a health catastrophe. Now, he lives with his best friend Lizette, who is essentially the inserted health at every size fat activist character, which you have to have in a novel like this, which is talking about things like this. She runs a plus size clothing company, and she is very supportive of Emmett. She loves him. She is very real the entire book. She dislikes Emmett's desire to lose weight because she views it as an act of self-hatred. And whatever you might personally think about that, she's right, because Emmett would be doing it out of self-hatred. Everything he does at this point in his life is born out of shame or self-loathing. There is no universe where he's trying to improve himself. So in Emmett's situation, Lizette is 100% right. So one day at work, Emmett spots an ad for a weight loss clinical trial on Instagram, and he goes. And it's like, of course, you would go to an ad you found on Instagram that is so depressingly modern, like health AI vibes, you know? So the book itself paints obesity as a national emergency because half of Americans are overweight. And you would think a book like this wouldn't make that argument, but it does this on purpose because thematically, in one hand, it holds Emmett and his experiences, and in the other hand, it holds like this cold, hard clinical facts and evidence. And it is illustrating this giant void and schism between those two things, because we are not treating human beings like human beings when we say statistics like that with no other context and with nothing empathetic to back it up. There is such a giant pit between someone's lived experience and what people think that we should do with evidence. So Emmett is given this opportunity to try this ridiculously expensive therapy for free. And in the body horror book, don't ever take the free medication. Like, don't. So Dr. Jenny Sato is the director of the drug program, and obesity basically rewrites your DNA, and then you take it with the injection Emaciate, and basically you don't have to change your lifestyle whatsoever. Your metabolism just speeds to lose like 30% of your body weight. It's a lot like Stephen King's Thinner, but instead the body horror acts as like it balloons Emmett and then shrinks him down in like a really unnatural, anti-human way, and it pushes it a little bit more than Thinner does. One of the first true gore scenes in the book is when Emmett is getting injected with the obesity in the first place, because you need like this initial injection. He is basically getting medically tortured, and it is so intense and harrowing to read, and I think it being medical torture is really important for one of the themes of the book. He is conscious as surgeons extract bone marrow, force a feeding tube down his throat, and inject a dark fluid into his belly. And it's super harrowing and super graphic. Afterward, a nurse insists that these are just medically induced nightmares and they didn't happen. But Emmett remembers. He doesn't tell Lizette what happens in fear that she will stop him from doing the drug, which she literally would have, but he doesn't tell anybody. This is a very direct metaphor for like the medical neglect that happens with obese and overweight people in hospitals. It's like a very well documented thing that people that are overweight face extreme medical stigma, and like you'll come into the doctor for something and they'll be like, lose weight, and they won't even look at you. It's very, very, very common. So because of the way Emmett is treated because of his weight and the shame that you're feeling internally with his inner monologue of shame and hatred, you're just as desperate as him to lose the weight. The book is pulling you towards this lose the weight mentality, and it puts you into this like tunnel vision like Emmett is in. He's constantly being disrespected, and he's in a lot of emotional pain, and basically he's torturing himself with anxiety. He just feels so judged and humiliated, and he's so aware of his body. And if you've never experienced that kind of body image issue, like especially with food noise or food thoughts like that are really like obsessive, I really recommend you read this book because it is exactly what it's like to have food noise. The way that it's described is almost too realistic. I was getting a little bit triggered by it, and I honestly was like, this is really intense. Like, for a horror book, it's really fucking intense. Now, on the drug, he wakes up after a few weeks having lost like 6 pounds overnight. So the dramatic weight loss continues with him losing about a pound or half a pound a day. And he begins this social media blog where he starts gaining followers because of his weight loss. So from here, the novel takes a sharp turn into hell, and you basically experience this descent into madness where Emmett is having really disturbing blackouts where he wakes up having no memory of what happened, having eaten and killed somebody. So he learns that he is killing and eating people who have disrespected him due to his weight. This is like somebody that he went on a date with, a gym bro. It like has a really campy sort of quality that is leaned into here, where it's like campy violence. And this almost gives you a false sense of security for how dark the book is going to go. Because at this point I was like, okay, this is very campy and very violent. I'm not expecting it to go darker than this if he's basically like an anti-superhero where he's killing people that are fatphobic. That's a little campy, but it gets so much worse. So while Emmett is on his rampaging at night, news reports are saying that there's a lot of coyote attacks in San Diego, but these are actually cover-ups by the obesity company because they know what Emmett is doing, because this is a documented side effect of obesity. And Emmett discovers that in phase 1, a woman was literally killed her husband and ate him. The novel also includes a lot of found footage blog posts from Emmett, so you get his story without like just hearing his inner monologue about it. And it is revealed the main source of his trauma and why he struggles so much with his weight. And the book is very self-aware. It says, not every overweight person has a very traumatic story, but this is a horror book, so of course Emmett has a traumatic story. So Hank is Emmett's stepfather. His mother isn't perfect either. She instills a lot of diet culture stuff into him from a young age, has him on like diet drug medication, and she's like just the classic body conscious mother who puts a lot of harmful ideas in his head. But Hank gives him actual trauma. Hank is a PhD scientist who, when Emmett was growing up, monitored Emmett's behavior with escalating cruelty because Emmett was always a chubby kid, which there's nothing wrong with that, but Hank was very cruel to him about that. Hank would hide food from him and just be very abusive. And one weekend, when Emmett's mother is away, Hank decides he is going to abuse Emmett in a very major way. So when Emmett was only 11, Hank starved him for days, force-fed him until he vomited, and then tied him to gym equipment and used a funnel to make him reconsume his own vomit. The few pages where they're describing this is so horrific, and I think what got to me the most out of like this story was before he like tied him to gym equipment and did that to him, he was not feeding him for like days, and like the desperation that Emmett is feeling, I felt, and I felt panicked myself, and it was very, very triggering for me. It was just really hard to read. So when Emmett's mother arrives home, she hits Hank over the head with a dumbbell, and the couple divorces and Hank disappears. But there was a lot of warning signs before this happened, and Emmett was constantly telling his mother, please, I can't be left alone with Hank. But she didn't listen. She's just not perfect. In earlier blog posts, Emmett also talks about a time where he bit Hank's hand in a struggle over food, and he tasted blood mixed with icing, and he really liked that. And that's a really simple action that describes two major metaphors going on here, which is pleasure and taboo. So Hank is actually revealed to have been fired for unauthorized human experiments, changed his name, founded Obesity, and then hand-selected Emmett for the trial. So there's obviously a whole bloody knockout drag down affair after this is revealed and Emmett finds out, and he's trying to be a whistleblower. But the book ends with Emmett dying and Obesity getting full FDA approval. So despite his death and his warnings, it is signed off with approval from Hank with the quote, for the health and happiness of the country. So Emmett's abuser now controls a very dangerous drug, and he also controls an institution meant to protect the public. So it ends in a very bleak and nihilistic way. So beyond this vibrant, bloody, really kind of convoluted plot, the novel is filled with very personal and specific experiences of Emmett's body image issues. For most of the novel, he is either shamed or fetishized, but most importantly, he represents a perfect fat person because he internalizes and accepts judgment and shame that people put onto him. He's behaving as the perfect fat person should behave according to society. He quits his teaching job. He purposely stunts his career to be less seen. He gives up on romance, and he behaves like he is ashamed and afraid to take up the space that he occupies. But even with all of his accommodating behaviors, he's never really allowed to exist. And he even has developed really restrictive eating behaviors, which, newsflash, fat people can have restrictive eating disorders. And people that don't know that, let's fucking get it together. Let's have a little bit of empathy for people. Jesus Christ. He was given eating issues from his mother, and it was just compounded on top of Hank's total abuse and the trauma that caused. But the drug inducing these cannibal instincts into Emmett is a full 180 from how he behaves in regular life. Cannibalism is a taking up of space in a way where you're taking somebody else's body too. It is unabashedly the most shameful act he could possibly do, and he does it with glee and with abandon and with violence. So this is the opposite of shame and hiding. It is quite literally eating somebody else. It's taking up more space than you're supposed to. And this sort of cannibalize someone in a valiant, violent effort and then go back to retreating and covering up and shame, that's a very ping pong theme that EDs really, really symbolize. You can try and control your body and every impulse, but there will always be an equal and opposite reaction to that. Just like Emmett would skip breakfast to binge later, the book is demonstrating the theme that you will always either internalize or externalize the shame that you're harboring about yourself. It will come out some way. Now, Lizette is a really interesting character because she does represent the equivalent of a health at every size influencer, which is one of the most controversial things on the fucking internet. It is extremely controversial and people get so mad at them. But I want to say something very important about this, and it's that Lizette is the only other option you have when you're living in a society that totally stigmatizes being fat. You can either become an Emmett or become a Lizette, and you don't really have an option. Because weight is literally everywhere in this novel. It is in clothes and vending machine options and doctor's offices and elevators and tattoo parlors and everywhere. It's literally a ghost and a veil on top of every experience that Emmett has is his weight. And if you've never dealt with that, it can be very eye-opening to know that some people move through the world with this over top of them because of the way that our society's built. It's just like a constant pressure. Like Emmett specifically dyes his hair crazy colors because it's one of the only things that he thinks distracts from his weight. So even his self-expression is determined by the way he feels about his weight. What I want to bring up is that you cannot expect an entire group of people with this type of societal pressure and shame to simply take that and not have an equal and opposite reaction to it. Because you can either internalize this shame or you can fight back against it. It frankly makes no sense to expect everybody to just live in shame for the rest of their life because they're overweight. That is the most insane thing ever. So instead of begging and scraping for respect and for the ability to take up space, like Emmett does, Lizette is basically the foil to him because she takes it aggressively and by force, and she creates space for herself. And she is very important because she acts as a sort of antithesis to our societal rules, and she in turn makes it easier through physically making clothes for bigger people, but also like socially, she makes it easier for other people to exist around her. It is really important for people with that kind of behavior and attitudes to exist, because if they did not, it would just be like total shame. She acts as an opposite reaction to all-encompassing judgment. And no, she's not like a perfect person, like nobody is, but she's a great friend to Emmett. Even when he's murdering people, she believes him and helps him. Like, she's a fantastic friend. And she also like has a boyfriend and is very happy. So it's like, the book is demonstrating your two options when it comes to living as an overweight person, and Lizette is the one that makes it out alive. So one of the major horrors of this book is the cage that it puts you in. Living as Emmett is essentially living in a prison, not because he is fat, but because of the way he reacts to being fat. And it's very, very suffocating to be Emmett and to be in his headspace. So why does cannibalism fit in so well here? Not only is it the act of eating, because that's a major thing, but cannibalism is basically the ultimate and one of the oldest taboos. Like, it's one of the first taboos you can do. It's very, very ancient. We have built-in mechanisms to not be cannibals. I'd say an unofficial synonym for cannibal is don't do that. Another thing that is very obviously taboo is being fat. Regardless of what percentage of people are fat, the stigma has not even gotten better. So it does not matter how many people are fat. It is taboo to be fat. Sociologist Irving Goffman framed fatness as a highly visible, stigmatized identity. Because fatness is physically apparent, he says that individuals face spoiled identity, constant social devaluation, and intense identity management as they navigate an exclusionary, thin-centric world. So he argued that people instantaneously judge a fat person the minute that they lay eyes on them, but also society treats visibly fat bodies as lesser human beings, attributing character flaws to them, like assuming a lack of discipline or willpower, which is so true. But he basically said when you're fat, you have 3 options on how to live in society with this stigma. You have to engage in specific identity management strategies. The first one is passing or hiding the stigmatized identity. For fat people, this is difficult as they may attempt to manage impressions by using clothing to alter their perceived size, shape, or contours. The very idea that women have a million body shapes and how to dress it in a flattering way is social proof that women do this all the time. And it's basically a version of identity management if you're not the beauty standard. Another way that he said that fat people deal with this pressure is withdrawing or avoiding social situations or communities where they feel rejected, judged, or physically misfitting. This can include places with seats that aren't big enough. And number 3 is exactly what Emmett does, which is aligning with the normals. This is adopting the moral judgments of a thin-centric society to minimize tension, such as self-deprecating humor or actively expressing a desire to lose weight. So this novel is basically what happens when you pick door number 3. And it's reinforcing the idea that it is a very difficult decision to pick one of these 3 if you have to pick one. And as we see, this is a battle to be accepted and respected that will never be won. And even when Emmett loses a significant amount of weight, the minute that he reveals that he took obesity to lose the weight, he gets bombarded with social media hate comments that are like very affecting to him. And that is one example of how when people see like someone who is visibly outside of the social norm, they want them to suffer or go away. It's like a very uncomfortable thing for people for some reason. In Nothing Tastes as Good, the cannibalism that Emmett experiences is violent and extreme. He's hunting and eating people in black outfits and leaving remains that look like a coyote got to them. There's this film called Helter Skelter, which is another body image, body horror movie, where this woman named Lilico is basically this like gorgeous model, and she's like this very public figure. She spends like 90% of her time obsessing over being beautiful and undergoing illegal cosmetic surgery that uses like baby fetus DNA or whatever to make her more beautiful and to keep her status in society. In Helter Skelter, the film is so surrealist and dreamy and like overwhelming with like this really intense music, but it's also like nightmarishly fluid, like changing based on the whims of Lilico's mental health, with camera angles that are like adjusting all the time, and it's very like whatever she's experiencing is how the world is. Emmett's world is very similarly malleable. He's losing time in cannibalistic blackouts, and when he gets angry and resentful, these blackouts are much worse. And I'd say in both of these horror universes, the way you look and the pressure to control that changes your entire perception of the world in a very real way. Because disordered eating functions like that scientifically. Lilico wants to control her body so badly, but can't. So she controls others, and she actually starts like SAing people and hurting people through others and doing like twisted power dynamics, games shit on other people, and using them for a sense of power and control. She's rebelling against this insane pressure for her to stay like unearthly beautiful by committing extreme taboos like adultery and coercion. And the film ends with her in the basement of a extremely transgressive club, if you know what I mean. Now, at first glance, Emmett doesn't seem to need to rebel against anything. But how is the pressure for him to be thin not the exact same pressure that Lilico has to be beautiful? The only difference is Lilico is used to like propagate a beauty standard and enforce it, and Emmett is on the receiving end of that. And it's interesting because people who have never struggled with food issues think that if you're overweight, you must just give in to every temptation you have. And that could not be further from the truth for most people. Emmett is on a relentless pursuit to have control over his food intake. He obsesses over it like the way he obsesses over his body. This is so much like Lilico obsessing over her beauty, constantly looking at herself in the mirror. And at the end, Lilico becomes a rapist criminal, and Emmett becomes a murdering cannibal. These crimes and like violence and sabotage are a release of the pressure that these characters are feeling inside. And it's metaphorically showing how intense this need for control is inside of these two characters' heads. And the body horror themes visually present in both are so important because, yeah, these urges are all about the body physically. Like these urges for control are all about your physical body. But these urges for control alienate you from your body very much. And as an audience member or a reader, you get to actually physically feel that alienation by being horrified by body horror. A lot of the body horror in these two medias are about not recognizing yourself anymore. Horror uses body horror like cannibalism or like fucked up surgery to externalize the shame, alienation, and the social stigma pressure of being hot. There's also so many other examples of horror media using body horror to show inner turmoil and pressure. In a lot of body horror, body image stories, people are unable to control their bodies, specifically the way that they look, so their own bodies betray them by rotting or committing cannibalism in blackouts, or deteriorating or committing extreme social taboos like murder. This is in the substance when the extreme pressure to be hot ends up in a total social suicide and death. This is also in Raw, and then there's this like really interesting body horror short by Guillermo del Toro called The Outside, which deals with the same idea. The more you exert control over your body, the more that it will rebel against you. So body horror media depicting the relentless pursuit for control is a classic for a reason. And I think as a final takeaway of the themes of this kind of horror, I'd like to read a quote by Sandra Lee Bartkey. The woman who, feeling fat, monitors everything she eats has become a self-policing object, a self-committed to relentless self-surveillance. And I think woman in this quote could be replaced with anybody. And Emmett being gay is important here because that's like double not fitting into the social standard. But a lot of feminist authors argue that the control for the female appetite for food is merely the most concrete expression of the general rule for governing how women should exist. That female hunger for public power, for independence, for sexual gratification be contained, and the public space that women be allowed to take up be circumscribed and limited. So culturally, Emmett is not just expected to control his hunger, but other expressions of himself in tandem with that. And at the end, this path leads to his death. What I think the author is trying to bring up is that you have a choice between following the path of cultural pressure and letting it destroy you in the process, or releasing that pressure upon yourself and just living with how hard that might be to do. And that is my little analysis of this book. I just thought that it really talked about a lot of stuff I've been thinking about a lot recently. I think we're in a really interesting time period because the road to that leads to its own sort of body horror and alienation. And it's so poetic. It's like its art represents real life so much. If you watched till the end, thank you so much and love you so much. I'm genuinely so sorry I've been gone. I've been really sick. Like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. I am going through my own kind of body horror right now. I feel like I'm always saying I'm sick, but this time it's like I have hives everywhere. Like, I have to take like Benadryl all the time, and Benadryl makes you high. Like, it's not a joke. It's not a joke. Just Allegra's better, just so you know. But I have hives everywhere, and I'm just feeling like so weird. There's also this chemical fire in LA that weirdly my symptoms showed up right when the chemical fire happened. So I'm like, am I just having a reaction to the chemicals? Maybe. But I really hope that I handle this topic with the respect it deserves. There's this scene in this show, Shrill, and the show's okay. Like, it's no Atlanta. Like, Atlanta might be the best show ever made. Seriously, I'm rewatching Atlanta. Holy shit, that show's fucking good. Oh my god. It's so thematically good. But I was watching Shrill, and there's an episode where the main character, who's plus size, was at this pool party, and she came to the pool party really anxious and scared. And then she was it was a plus size event. And then as she became more comfortable knowing everybody around her was not judging her, she like was able to be herself. And I just think about what kind of weight could be lifted off if every space was like that. Like, how great would that be if every single space you felt like you could be yourself because there was no social pressure to be thin? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? It's just really sad because it's like, I feel like people don't realize that a part of you has to die to fit in, basically. Just sucks. So anyway, peace and love, and hope you have a great night or a great day, and thanks for watching.